I had no idea that my life was about to change the moment I stepped into the penthouse that evening. It had been a long day at work, the kind that drained the energy out of you but left you with the comfort of knowing that home awaited. Home. That word didn't just mean a physical space. It was supposed to be our space, mine and Vanessa's. A sanctuary where everything felt familiar, where the scent of her perfume lingered in the air, where the warmth of our life together embraced me the second I walked through the door. But that night, something was wrong. The silence was the first thing that struck me. Usually, Vanessa would have music playing softly, maybe a candle burning, a glass of wine in her hand. But as I stepped inside, a heavy emptiness settled over me. The air felt hollow, stripped of the warmth and familiarity I expected. Then I saw it. The penthouse was bare. The sleek leather couch? Gone. The custom-made dining table we had picked out together? Missing. Even the paintings that once adorned the walls, art she had insisted on buying, swearing they made the place feel lived in, were nowhere to be found. My eyes darted around the space, my mind racing to process what I was seeing. The bookshelves? Empty. The rug in the living room? Vanished. Had we been robbed? A cold weight settled in my stomach. I dropped my briefcase by the door and took slow, careful steps inside, my heart pounding. My gaze flickered toward the kitchen, half expecting shattered glass, overturned chairs, any sign of a break-in. But everything that remained was perfectly untouched, like the place had been stripped bare on purpose. That's when I saw her. Vanessa. She was standing by the open balcony doors, a glass of red wine in her hand, swirling it casually like nothing was amiss. Her long silk robe draped over her shoulders, and she looked out at the skyline, completely unbothered, as if she hadn't just turned our home into a hollow shell of what it used to be. I opened my mouth, then closed it. 1,000 thoughts stormed through my mind, but I settled on the only question that mattered. What the hell happened here? Vanessa didn't even flinch. She turned to face me slowly, her expression unreadable, lips curving into something that almost resembled amusement. "Oh," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "I sold it." Her voice was light, like she was telling me she changed the brand of coffee she drank, not that she had just erased our life together in a single afternoon. I felt my breath hitch. "You sold it?" She raised a delicate eyebrow. "Yes." A strange, deafening silence stretched between us. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what she had just said. Sold it? The penthouse? The furniture? The art? Every single thing that we built together? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remain composed, even as something sharp and cold twisted in my chest. "Why?" I asked, my voice quieter now, measured. She smirked, stepping forward with the same ease as if she were gliding across a ballroom. "Because, darling," she said, tilting her head slightly, "my boyfriend deserves the good life." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, but she didn't flinch, didn't waver. She just stood there, watching me, waiting for my reaction, like this was some kind of game to her. "You sold our home," I said slowly, tasting the bitterness of the words as they left my mouth. "For another man?" She smiled, actually smiled, as if she had just announced something completely reasonable. "Yes," she said. "We're leaving for Europe tonight. He wanted this place, and I made it happen." The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I exhaled through my nose, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to lash out, to demand answers, to break something just to match the destruction she had caused. But I didn't. Instead, I let a slow, steady breath escape me. I let the silence settle, let it stretch between us. Then, I nodded. Just once. "Very well." That's when I saw it, the first flicker of confusion in her eyes. She had expected rage. She had expected screaming, accusations, chaos. She had wanted a scene, something to justify whatever twisted narrative she had created to make herself feel like the victim. But I didn't give her any of that. Instead, I turned away from her, walking further into what remained of the penthouse, my footsteps slow, deliberate. I let my fingers trail over the empty spaces, the shelves where our books used to be, the spot where the grand piano once sat. Gone. All of it. She had erased it like we had never existed. I turned back to face her, studying the way she stood there so confidently, so sure of herself. And yet, beneath that smirk, beneath the arrogant gleam in her eyes, I saw it. Doubt. She thought she had one, but she had no idea what was coming next. She had no idea that I already knew, that I had seen this coming from a mile away, that I had spent the last 3 weeks preparing for this exact moment. So, I smiled. Just a little. Just enough for her to notice. And that's when the first crack in her perfect facade appeared. I stood there, watching Vanessa swirl the last remnants of wine in her glass, that smug smile still playing on her lips like she had orchestrated the most elaborate checkmate in history. She thought she had outplayed me, that I was standing in the wreckage of my own life, blind and unsuspecting. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I had seen it coming. I had known long before she ever set this plan in motion. I let my eyes drift over her, taking in the way she held herself, the way she exuded confidence, victory. She wanted me to crumble. She wanted me to react, to scream, to lash out. But all she got from me was a quiet nod. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Doubt. She had been so sure that I would be broken by this, that I would be devastated. And yet, I wasn't. She didn't know that I had already taken my first step toward ruining her. I turned away from her, slowly, deliberately, walking toward the window that overlooked the city skyline. I stuffed my hands in my pockets, feeling the cool metal of my ace and the whole resting in my palm. A flash drive containing every single piece of evidence I had collected over the last month. Vanessa thought she was the mastermind in this. She thought she had orchestrated a perfect betrayal. She was wrong. I had already seen the cracks in her carefully constructed facade weeks ago. The missed calls at odd hours. The way she started dressing up even when she had nowhere to go. The extra shopping bags, the sudden insistence on meeting with a client last minute, rushing out of the penthouse without looking me in the eye. I'm not a fool. I never was. So, I did what any smart man would do. I hired a private investigator. And what I discovered, it was worse than I expected. She had been planning this for months. She fabricated a fake business trip, using the time to finalize the sale of our penthouse behind my back. She had forged my signature, transferred the funds to herself, and made sure that when the time came, I would be left with nothing. She was clever. I'll give her that. But not clever enough. Because I already knew everything. I turned back to her, schooling my expression into something neutral. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing anything. Not anger, not sadness, not even curiosity. Just silence. She shifted slightly, the first real sign of unease creeping into her confident exterior. You're awfully quiet, she remarked, tilting her head, studying me. I expected more of a reaction. I simply shrugged. I suppose I just don't see the point. Her smirk faltered, just for a second. I walked over to the kitchen counter, grabbing a glass and pouring myself a drink. I didn't rush. I let the silence stretch between us, let her feel it, let it unsettle her. I took a slow sip before finally speaking. So, tell me, Vanessa, was it worth it? She blinked, as if the question had caught her off guard. Was what worth it? She asked, feigning innocence, as if she hadn't just dismantled our life with the stroke of a pin. I gave her a knowing look, one that told her I wasn't playing along with her games. Selling everything we built. Lying. Stealing. I set my glass down, leveling my gaze with hers. Was it worth it? Her lips pressed together, but then she let out a light chuckle, as if I had just asked her something ridiculous. You're acting like this is some great tragedy, she said, rolling her eyes. People get divorced all the time. I let out a low hum. Divorced? Is that what you think this is? She lifted her chin defiantly. It is what it is. I laughed, shaking my head. No, Vanessa. This is fraud. She stiffened, just slightly. I leaned in, bracing my hands on the counter, letting my voice drop to something dangerously quiet. You forged my signature, I said slowly, watching as her smirk twitched, faltered. That's a felony. She scoffed, but it wasn't as confident this time. Oh, please. No one's going to arrest me for a little. I cut her off. I also know about the offshore account. That stopped her cold. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass, her knuckles turning white. She tried to mask the panic that flashed in her eyes, but I caught it. I smiled. Checkmate. You really thought you were the only one playing the game, didn't you? I asked, tilting my head. You thought you'd run off with Damien, live in luxury with the money you stole, and I'd be left in ruins? I took another sip of my drink, savoring the way her entire demeanor had shifted. That confident, arrogant woman who stood in front of me moments ago, she was unraveling. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off before she could spin another lie. I already took care of everything, I said, setting my glass down. I had the bank accounts frozen this afternoon. By now, your offshore account is under investigation. Her eyes widened. The sale of the penthouse? I continued, watching her carefully. Void. Turns out, forged documents tend to get thrown out in court. Her breathing had quickened, her chest rising and falling as she tried to process what was happening. She looked down at her phone, no doubt checking her bank app, but I already knew what she would find. Nothing. She had played her game, but she had underestimated me. I picked up my drink and leaned back against the counter, watching as Vanessa slowly pieced it together, the panic creeping up her spine. You really thought you outsmarted me, I mused. But Vanessa, darling. I let my smirk grow just enough for her to see it. You were never ahead. She was shaking now, trying to maintain composure, but she had lost control of the game. And this was only the beginning. I watched Vanessa in silence, my fingers lightly tapping against the rim of my glass. The shift in her demeanor was subtle but undeniable. A few minutes ago, she had stood before me like a queen celebrating her final victory, basking in what she thought was my helplessness. Now, she wasn't so sure. The weight of my words had begun sinking in. Still, she wasn't ready to break just yet. She lifted her chin, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass as she forced a smirk back onto her lips. It was a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand, and I could see the calculation in her eyes as she tried to figure out a way to talk her way out of this. You're bluffing, she finally said. You want me to believe that you saw this coming, that you've already undone everything I worked for? She let out a small, breathy laugh. That's cute. I tilted my head slightly, letting the silence stretch between us again, letting her second-guess herself. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the counter between us. The screen was still open to my banking app. Her eyes flicked downward, scanning the numbers, and that was the moment I saw real panic creep into her expression. Her face paled. What? She breathed, her fingers hovering over the screen. What the hell is this? I picked up my drink and took a slow sip, enjoying the unraveling before me. That, I said, placing the glass down with deliberate ease, is the bank account you so graciously drained just a few days ago. Or at least it was. She didn't speak, but I could see the frantic thoughts racing through her mind. She knew how much money she had stolen from me, how carefully she had planned every transaction to ensure I wouldn't notice in time. But now, she was staring at zero. Her voice wavered, but she tried to mask it with indifference. You're lying. The money's in my account. I checked this morning. I let out a slow chuckle. I'm sure it was there this morning. But you see, Vanessa, fraud is a very serious crime. I leaned forward slightly. And when you forge someone's signature, banks tend to take that very seriously. She sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers twitching. She wasn't used to this. Vanessa had always been in control, always the one pulling the strings. But right now, for the first time, she was cornered. Her gaze darted to the door, and I knew exactly what she was thinking. She wanted to run. Go ahead, I said, watching her. Check your own accounts. Call your precious Damien. Hell, book the next flight to Europe if you want. I gestured toward the door. Let's see how far you get. The color drained from her face. She reached into her robe pocket, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. She tapped furiously, her jaw tightening as she logged into her accounts. Her eyes widened in horror. No, she whispered under her breath, her chest rising and falling rapidly. No, no, no. I smiled. There it is. I took my time, swirling the last bit of whiskey in my glass before downing it. You should have been more careful, I mused, shaking my head. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the extra withdrawals? The offshore transfers? The sudden change in your spending habits? I let out a disappointed sigh. Vanessa, you got sloppy. She slammed her phone onto the counter. You had no right, she snapped, her voice sharp with anger and something else, fear. I chuckled. No right? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You forged my signature, emptied my accounts, and sold our home out from under me. And you have the audacity to talk about rights? I shook my head. I only did what was necessary to protect what was mine. She was breathing hard now, her hands gripping the counter like she needed it to stay upright. I could see her mind racing, scrambling for a way out. But there was no way out. I had planned for everything. I stepped around the counter, walking slowly toward her, watching as she stiffened. For the first time in years, I saw real fear in her eyes. You thought you had me trapped, I murmured. That I'd fall apart the second I walked into this penthouse and found it empty. I tilted my head. That was your mistake, Vanessa. She shook her head, her throat bobbing as she swallowed. You don't understand, she whispered. I narrowed my eyes. Oh, I understand perfectly. She clenched her jaw, then let out a shaky breath. Her voice softened, took on an almost pleading tone. I wanted something different. She looked away. Damien made me feel alive. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. No, Vanessa. He made you feel special. I leaned in slightly. And now he's gone. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening. Oh, she hadn't expected me to know that. You really thought he'd stay? I chuckled. You think a man like Damien wants a broke, legally ruined woman on his arm? I shrugged. He probably ran the second he realized you had nothing left to offer him. She flinched like I had struck her. I stepped back, running a hand through my hair. But don't worry, Vanessa, I said, sighing. I won't leave you with nothing. Her eyes lit up with the faintest sliver of hope. Then I smiled, slow and sharp. I'll make sure you leave with something you truly deserve. She froze. What do you mean? I picked up my phone, dialing a number as I turned toward the window. Alex, I said smoothly when my lawyer answered. It's time. Vanessa sucked in a sharp breath. No, wait. I ended the call, sliding my hands into my pockets as I turned back to face her. Congratulations, Vanessa. I gave her a slow, satisfied smile. You just lost everything. And for the first time since this all started, I saw the panic truly consume her. Vanessa stared at me, her lips slightly parted, eyes flickering between fury and fear. She was unraveling, but still, she fought to maintain control, to find a sliver of authority in a situation where she had none. Her hands trembled as she gripped the counter, her knuckles white. You don't understand, she whispered. Her voice lacked the arrogance it held earlier. Now, it was raw, desperate. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. I tilted my head slightly, watching her like a spectator watching a play unfold. Oh, I mused, taking slow, measured steps toward her. How exactly was it supposed to happen, Vanessa? She swallowed hard. I wanted more, she admitted, but there was no remorse in her voice. I wanted freedom, excitement. I wanted to be with someone who... I cut her off with a chuckle. Someone who what? I asked, my voice calm, controlled. Someone who could spend my money on you? Someone who could pretend to love you as long as the cash kept flowing. She flinched. I took another step closer. Tell me, Vanessa, where is Damien now? Her jaw clenched. I don't know, she said, but I could see the slight shake of her head, the way her fingers dug into the counter. She did know. I smirked. Let me guess. The moment he realized your accounts were frozen, the moment he saw the bank decline your little European vacation, he suddenly stopped answering your calls? I shook my head. That's the thing about parasites, Vanessa. They jump ship the moment the host is no longer useful. She exhaled sharply, turning her back to me, gripping the edge of the counter. You don't know anything, she snapped. I watched her for a long moment, letting the silence settle between us. She was breaking. She knew it. and I was just getting started. I picked up my phone again and dialed. It rang once before Alex, my lawyer, answered. Is everything set? I asked, my voice smooth, even. Everything is finalized, Alex replied. The fraud report has been submitted, and authorities will be looking into the offshore transfers. The penthouse's sale has been reversed. Your ownership is restored. She has nothing. I smiled. Perfect. I didn't lower my voice. I wanted Vanessa to hear every word. When I ended the call, I turned to face her, watching the way her shoulders had stiffened. Slowly, she turned back around, her eyes wide, panic creeping in. What did you do? She whispered. I let out a slow breath, feigning sympathy. I just corrected a few mistakes, I said casually. For instance, the forged signature? That's a felony. The offshore transfers? Highly illegal. I leaned in just slightly. You wanted to play dirty, Vanessa. I just made sure you were playing on my turf. She shook her head, stepping away. No, you wouldn't. I smiled. Wouldn't I? I gestured toward her phone. Try booking a flight, I said. Try calling Damien. Try withdrawing $1 from the account you thought was yours. She hesitated before snatching her phone. Her fingers moved quickly over the screen, and then declined. I saw it in her eyes before she even spoke. The truth had settled. Reality had finally caught up with her. No, she whispered again, her breathing uneven. She tapped again, switching apps, trying another card. Declined. She let out a strangled gasp. You bastard. I simply shrugged. Did you really think I'd let you win? Her breathing turned ragged as she realized the full extent of what had happened. You ruined me. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice to a whisper. No, Vanessa, I said. You ruined yourself. She clenched her jaw, her nostrils flaring. Then, in an act of pure frustration, she hurled her wine glass at me. I didn't flinch. I let it shatter against the wall behind me, red droplets staining the white marble floor. I exhaled, shaking my head. Temper, I murmured. She pressed her hands to her temples, exhaling sharply. I can fix this, she whispered, more to herself than to me. I watched her for a moment, then chuckled. Oh, sweetheart, I said, my voice dripping with amusement. There's no fixing this. She turned to me, her face red with anger and humiliation. I was your wife, she hissed. You loved me. I met her gaze, letting the weight of my silence speak for itself. Yes, I had loved her. Once. But that love had died the moment she chose greed over loyalty. She must have seen the answer in my expression because she suddenly let out a sharp breath, her shoulders shaking. She turned away, walking toward the door in slow, heavy steps. Then, as if remembering something, she stopped. She turned back to me, desperation flickering in her eyes. Let me stay, she said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? She swallowed, the last of her pride crumbling. I made a mistake, she said, her voice quieter now. I was stupid. She took a breath. Just let me stay. We can fix this. I let out a humorless chuckle. Fix this? I repeated. You sold our home, stole my money, planned a future with another man. And now, because you've lost everything, you want me to pretend none of it happened? Her eyes darted away. I wasn't thinking clearly. I exhaled slowly, stepping closer. You were thinking perfectly clearly, Vanessa, I murmured. You just didn't think I would be thinking ahead. She said nothing. I sighed and glanced toward the door. I think you know where the exit is. She swallowed, her eyes glistening, but I felt nothing for her anymore. After a long moment, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. I stared at it for a few seconds before taking a deep breath, rolling my shoulders back. Then, without a second thought, I reached for my glass, poured myself another drink, and let the satisfaction settle over me. She had played her game, but I had one. 1 week. That's how long it took. I knew Vanessa would come back. It wasn't a question of if, only when. She had nowhere else to go. No money, no friends who would support her once they found out she wasn't rich anymore. The lavish European getaway she had fantasized about had collapsed before it even began. Damien, the man she had thrown everything away for, had disappeared like smoke in the wind the moment her credit cards stopped working. I imagined her scrambling, panicked, trying to salvage what she could. Maybe she had begged her friends for help. Maybe she had even reached out to Damien, only to receive radio silence in return. But I didn't have to imagine the moment she realized she had no options left. Because now, she was standing in front of me. She had come back. The door to the penthouse opened, and Vanessa strolled in like she still owned the place, like she hadn't walked out a week ago believing she had one. I was already waiting, seated comfortably in the living room, a glass of bourbon in my hand. I didn't even glance up right away. I let her feel the weight of her failure before acknowledging her. When I finally looked at her, I took my time. She had tried to pull herself together before showing up here. Her makeup was flawless, her outfit carefully chosen, expensive, elegant, but I could see the cracks beneath the surface. The slight smudge under her eyes, barely concealed. The way she clenched her purse just a little too tightly. The fake confidence in her stride, masking what I already knew. She was desperate. I swirled my drink lazily, tilting my head. "You're back sooner than I expected." She smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. I needed time to think. I let out a quiet chuckle, leaning back against the couch. Is that what you were doing? Thinking? She ignored the mockery in my voice, stepping further into the room like she belonged there. "I assume you're done playing games," she said smoothly. "We've had our fun. Now let's be adults about this." I raised an eyebrow. "Adults?" She nodded, placing her bag down on the counter. "Yes. I admit, things got a little heated." She waved a hand dismissively, as if fraud, theft, and betrayal were just minor inconveniences. "But we don't have to keep this hostility going. We were partners once. We can be again." I stared at her, amused. "Partners?" "Yes." She exhaled as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. "Look, I made mistakes, but we can work through this." You're homeless, aren't you?" Her mouth snapped shut. That brief second of hesitation told me everything. I smirked, shaking my head. "You thought Damien would take care of you, didn't you?" I said casually, sipping my bourbon. "Let me guess. The moment he found out your bank accounts were frozen, he suddenly got busy?" I leaned forward, watching her closely. "Did he even wait a full 24 hours before cutting you off?" She inhaled sharply, her nostrils flaring. "That's none of your business." I shrugged. "No, I suppose it isn't." I took another sip, savoring the taste. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't entertaining. Her fists clenched. "I don't have time for your little jokes." "No, Vanessa," I murmured. "You don't have time at all." Silence. She stared at me, her expression wavering for the first time. "What do you mean?" I set my glass down and stood, walking over to her with slow, deliberate steps. "You came back here thinking you still had leverage," I said quietly. "That I'd be hurt. That I'd want you back, or at the very least, need you here." I smiled. "But, Vanessa," I gestured around the penthouse, "you don't live here anymore." Her brows furrowed, but before she could speak, another voice cut in. "She really thought she could just waltz back in, huh?" Vanessa stiffened. I turned, and there, standing near the hallway, was Sarah, my lawyer, and my new girlfriend. Sarah was everything Vanessa wasn't. Smart, loyal, sharp as a blade. She had seen right through Vanessa from the beginning, and now, she stood with a glass of wine in her hand, watching my ex-wife with thinly veiled amusement. Vanessa's eyes widened, and for the first time, she truly looked caught off guard. "Her," she hissed. "You're with her?" Sarah laughed softly, taking a slow sip of her wine before stepping forward, slipping her arm around my waist. "Did you think he'd be heartbroken forever?" she asked, tilting her head. "That he'd be lost without you?" Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You're joking." Sarah smirked. "Not at all." She set her glass down, then reached into a folder on the counter. "Speaking of jokes," she said, pulling out a court order, "this is for you." Vanessa snatched it, scanning the papers, her face draining of color as she read the words. She looked up at me, her voice shaking. "You're evicting me?" I chuckled. "You sold the penthouse, remember? It belongs to me now. You have no claim to it. You don't live here. You're trespassing." She shook her head in disbelief. "You wouldn't." "I would," Sarah interrupted, crossing her arms. "And we did." Vanessa's chest rose and fell rapidly as she turned to me, her eyes glistening with emotion she had no right to feel. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. I studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. "You did this to yourself," I said quietly. And with that, I walked away. Vanessa stood there, gripping the court order, her entire world crumbling around her. She had walked into the penthouse expecting to reclaim what she had lost. Instead, she had walked into the final stage of her downfall. Vanessa stood frozen, her grip tightening around the court order, her entire body stiff with shock. It was one thing for her to face consequences in private, but the moment she realized she wasn't alone, that Sarah was there, standing beside me, it broke something inside her. She had returned expecting to reclaim control, expecting me to be shattered, lost without her, desperate to take her back. But now, she saw the truth. She had lost, and she had no way out. I watched her as she read the document again, hoping to find some loophole, something to disprove the reality staring her in the face. But there was none. "You look pale," Sarah said smoothly, sipping her wine. "Not what you expected." Vanessa slowly looked up, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Her face twisted with rage, disbelief, and, beneath it all, fear. I stepped forward, my voice calm, even. "You forged my signature. You stole my money. You sold my home. And now, you think you can just walk back and like nothing happened?" I shook my head. "Vanessa, this isn't a second chance. This is your reckoning." Her breath hitched. "I can fix this," Sarah chuckled, setting her glass down. "No, Vanessa, you can't." Vanessa's eyes darted between the two of us before she let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "This is ridiculous. What do you even want from me?" Sarah smirked. "Nothing." That single word sent a ripple of panic through Vanessa. She had been expecting conditions, demands, a way to negotiate her way back into the life she destroyed. But hearing that she had nothing to offer, that terrified her. I turned away, walking to the dining table where a small stack of neatly prepared envelopes sat. I picked one up, holding it between my fingers. "Do you know what these are?" I asked, my voice casual. Vanessa didn't answer, but her gaze locked onto the papers like they were a loaded gun. I tossed the first envelope onto the counter. "These," I said, tapping the stack, "are invitations." Sarah leaned against the counter, smirking. "We thought it would be appropriate to invite a few of your closest acquaintances," she said. Vanessa's lips parted. "Invite them to what?" I smiled. "To watch." She blinked. "Watch what?" Sarah picked up one of the envelopes, waving it slightly. "To watch you lose everything." Vanessa took an involuntary step back. "You wouldn't." I let out a slow breath. "Wouldn't I?" She shook her head, eyes flickering with something close to dread. "I made some calls," I continued, my voice calm, matter of fact. "I thought your friends, your old business contacts, even your parents, might like to know the truth." Her lips trembled. "You didn't." I shrugged. "Oh, I did." Sarah sighed dramatically. "I mean, it's only fair. You tried to humiliate him first." She tilted her head. "Did you really think you could sell everything, run off with your little boyfriend, and no one would find out?" Vanessa let out a strangled breath. No, this isn't happening." I picked up another invitation, flipping it between my fingers. "This is for your former best friend, Michelle," I mused. "The one you always bragged to about how much better your life was than hers." I set it down, picking up another. "And this one? Your boss at that boutique consulting firm? The one who always told you that you had a great future." Vanessa's entire body locked up. "Stop." I ignored her, setting the final envelope down. "And this last one? This is for your parents." She flinched as if I had slapped her. Her breathing became erratic, her fingers curling into fists. "You wouldn't do that," she whispered. I lifted an eyebrow. "Why wouldn't I?" Tears pooled in her eyes. But I knew Vanessa well enough to know that this wasn't remorse. It wasn't even about losing me. It was about her reputation. It was about being exposed. She didn't fear consequences. She feared humiliation. I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice. "I want you to understand something, Vanessa," I murmured. "This isn't about revenge. This isn't about hate. This is about justice." She let out a shaky breath. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this." I stared at her, tilting my head slightly. "You mean, don't do what you did to me?" She swallowed, and for the first time since this all began, she looked completely, utterly lost. Sarah sighed, stretching her arms. "Well, you have options." Vanessa's head snapped toward her, eyes desperate. "What options?" Sarah smirked. "You can leave now, with nothing, and disappear before everyone finds out what you did." She sipped her wine. "Or, you can stick around, and let the world watch you fall." Vanessa let out a choked sound, her eyes darting toward me, begging. I just gave her a long, hard look. And then, I said the words that ended her. "You can't fake your way out of this." A single tear slipped down her cheek. She knew it was over. Slowly, she turned, reaching for her bag, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, without another word, she walked toward the door. She stopped just before opening it, hesitating, as if waiting for me to stop her, to say something, to give her an out. But I didn't. She let out a small, broken exhale, and then she was gone. Sarah let out a small whistle, shaking her head. Damn, that was satisfying. I exhaled slowly, setting my glass down, letting the silence of the penthouse settle. I had one. And now? Now, I could finally move on. Vanessa had always been a woman who prided herself on control. She was the type who carefully curated her life like a designer collection, ensuring that every piece fit perfectly, that every detail was polished and pristine. She controlled her image, her social standing, and the people around her, manipulating, deceiving, and weaving a web of lies to keep herself untouchable. But now, she was watching her perfect world crumble. I stood by the window, watching as she hurried out of the building, her shoulders stiff, her pace quick and unsteady. She clutched her purse like it was the only thing keeping her together, and I wondered how it felt to be the one who was discarded, to be the one running away. It was fitting, because just 1 week ago, I had come home expecting a normal evening, only to find my world turned upside down. She had taken everything from me. My home, my money, my trust. And she had done it with a smirk, believing I would be left with nothing. But here I was, still standing, thriving, and she was the one crumbling. I turned away from the window and took a slow breath. The penthouse was mine again, every trace of Vanessa erased. The space felt cleaner, lighter, free. The suffocating presence of her lies, her deception, the weight of her betrayal, it was all gone. Sarah walked in from the balcony, a satisfied smile on her lips. "I have to say," she mused, picking up her wine glass, watching her unravel was even more satisfying than I imagined. I chuckled, running a hand through my hair. I knew she'd break the moment she realized she had no options left. Sarah leaned against the counter, tilting her head. "Think she'll try to fight back?" I exhaled slowly, considering the question. Vanessa wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. She was stubborn, cunning. She had spent years perfecting the art of deception. But this time, she wasn't just losing a battle. She was losing the war. "She might try," I admitted, pouring myself a drink, "but it won't matter. She has no money, no credibility, and no allies left." Sarah smirked. "So, what happens now?" I took a slow sip of my bourbon, letting the rich burn settle in my chest. "Now," I murmured. "Now, she gets to feel what it's like to lose." The first blow. I didn't need to actively destroy Vanessa's reputation. She did that all on her own. The moment the news spread, the invitations I had sent out did exactly what I wanted them to do. Word traveled fast. People whispered, gossiped, speculated. Her former friends, The ones she used to flaunt her wealth to, began distancing themselves. Her social circles, the ones she used to control, turned on her. And then came the real fallout. Vanessa's parents were the first to confront her. I didn't have to witness the conversation to know how it played out. They were proud, wealthy, and well-respected. People who valued status above all else. And now, their golden daughter was a public embarrassment. They had no choice but to let her move back in with them, but I knew it wasn't out of kindness. No, Vanessa had become their burden, and that was the worst punishment for someone who had spent her entire life trying to prove she was superior to everyone around her. The second blow? Her career. Vanessa had always balanced between being a socialite and a professional. She had a respectable position at an exclusive consulting firm, one that catered to high-profile clients. But when whispers of fraud, theft, and betrayal started circulating, her boss didn't hesitate. She was fired. She had tried to fight it, of course, tried to talk her way out of it. But you can't negotiate your way out of consequences. And then, the final, crushing blow. Her beloved Damien. I had been curious, morbidly so, about how long their perfect little affair would last now that she had nothing left to offer. But, unsurprisingly, Damien had vanished the moment the money was gone. Vanessa had reached out to him dozens of times, but all she got in return was silence. She had thrown away everything for him, and he had discarded her like yesterday's trash. Poetic, wasn't it? The desperate attempt. It took exactly 10 days before she tried to reach out to me. I saw her name flash on my phone, but I didn't pick up. She tried calling again, then texting. Please, just talk to me. We can fix this. I made a mistake. I stared at the messages, shaking my head. Mistake? No. A mistake was forgetting to pick up milk from the store. A mistake was leaving your phone at home. What she had done, that was a choice. A premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded choice. And she expected forgiveness? No. Instead of replying, I set my phone down and walked to the balcony, letting the crisp evening air wash over me. Vanessa was drowning, and she was reaching for me. The very man she tried to destroy. She had spent years making me feel like I was replaceable, like I wasn't enough, like she was always in control. But now, she was powerless, and I was finally free. I took a slow sip of my drink, exhaling deeply. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice, and I had never felt more at peace. I knew it was coming. The desperate plea, the final act of a woman who had lost everything and had nowhere else to turn. It was predictable, almost pathetic, but I had waited for it nonetheless. And now it was here. Vanessa stood outside my penthouse, her face pale, her once polished appearance slightly disheveled. The proud, untouchable woman I had once known was gone. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, letting my gaze sweep over her. She had dressed carefully, as if trying to reclaim some of her former confidence, but I could see the cracks beneath the surface, the hesitation in her stance, the way she clutched her purse like a lifeline. She forced a small, hopeful smile. Hey! I stared at her. Vanessa. A flicker of unease crossed her face. She had expected warmth, or at the very least, a reaction. But I gave her nothing. She shifted on her feet, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I know I shouldn't be here, she admitted, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. But I needed to talk to you. I didn't move. Talk? She swallowed. Yes, just a conversation. Please. I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. That's interesting. You didn't seem interested in talking when you sold our home out from under me. She winced. I know. When you emptied my bank accounts. She lowered her gaze. When you walked out of here, laughing with your boyfriend, thinking you had one. Her breath hitched. I was wrong. I tilted my head. Oh, now you're wrong? She nodded quickly, stepping forward. Yes, I made a mistake. Her voice trembled. I wasn't thinking clearly. I got caught up in the excitement. She stopped herself, inhaling sharply. I messed up, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just wanted to ask if we could. No. The word cut through her like a blade. She blinked, her lips parting slightly. No. I exhaled slowly. No, Vanessa. We can't fix this. We won't fix this. She took another step closer, her hands trembling now. But we had something, didn't we? We were. I let out a low, humorless laugh. We were nothing the moment you decided I was disposable. Her breath came faster, panic creeping into her expression. I was stupid, she whispered. I was selfish. But I loved you. I still love you. I raised an eyebrow. You loved me? She nodded, her eyes shining. Is that what love looks like? I murmured. Deception? Greed? Betrayal? She reached for my hand, but I stepped back, shaking my head. You didn't love me, Vanessa, I said quietly. You loved what I gave you. You loved the lifestyle, the money, the power. But me? I exhaled. I was just a means to an end. Her shoulders shook. No, that's not true. I studied her for a long moment, letting the silence settle between us. Where's Damien? She froze, and that was all the answer I needed. I smirked. He left, didn't he? She swallowed hard. He wasn't who I thought he was. I chuckled. No, Vanessa. He was exactly who you thought he was. You just never expected to be on the receiving end of his betrayal. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. She had no one left. Her friends had abandoned her. Her career was ruined. Her own parents barely tolerated her presence. And now, the man she had thrown me away for had discarded her like yesterday's trash. She was truly alone. She wiped at her eyes, sniffling. I have nowhere to go, she whispered. I took a slow sip of my drink. That's not my problem. Her breath hitched. Please, she begged. I'll do anything. Just let me stay, just for a little while, until I figure things out. I stared at her, letting her words settle. She was desperate, truly desperate, but I knew what she was doing. She thought if she could just get her foot back in the door, she could weasel her way back in, manipulate her way back into my life. She thought I was still the same man she had left behind, but I wasn't. I set my drink down and stepped forward until I was just inches away from her. She looked up at me, hopeful, and then I whispered, "Get out." She let out a small, broken sound. What? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You are nothing to me, Vanessa. Nothing. I leaned in slightly, and I want you as far away from me as possible. Tears spilled over her cheeks. I don't have anywhere else to go, she whispered again. I tilted my head. That's funny. I smirked. Because neither did I when you did this to me. She let out a choked sob. I took a deep breath, stepping back and nodding toward the door. Leave. She shook her head, pleading with her eyes, but I didn't waver. I had given her everything, and she had burned it all to the ground. There was no going back. Finally, she swallowed the last of her pride, turned, and walked toward the door. She stopped for just a moment, as if hoping I'd change my mind. But I didn't. She exhaled shakily, then opened the door and stepped out. I waited until the door clicked shut behind her, and then I let go. I took a deep breath, rolling my shoulders back, feeling the weight lift off me. She was gone. For good. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't watch her walk away. I didn't need to. The moment the door clicked shut, it was over. Vanessa was gone, and this time, she wasn't coming back. I exhaled, rolling my shoulders as I let the silence settle over me. A week ago, I had walked into this penthouse expecting a home, only to find a betrayal so deep, so deliberate, that it threatened to break me. But I hadn't broken. I had won. I walked back into the living room, reaching for my drink, savoring the quiet victory that now hung in the air. The past few weeks had been a storm of deceit, manipulation, and calculated revenge. But now, there was nothing left to fight. Vanessa was ruined. Her social life? Gone. Her career? Destroyed. Her relationship with Damien? Non-existent. She had lost everything she had tried to take from me. And what was I left with? Myself. I hadn't just reclaimed my penthouse. I had reclaimed my dignity, my pride, my power. And yet, as I stood there, drink in hand, I couldn't help but wonder, was this what victory felt like? I should have been overjoyed. I should have been celebrating. And yet, there was an emptiness inside me, one I hadn't expected. Not because I missed her. I had mourned Vanessa long before this moment. No, the emptiness came from something else entirely. Time. Time spent loving the wrong person. Time spent building a life with someone who had been planning to betray me all along. Years, gone in the blink of an eye. I sat down on the couch, rubbing my temple as the weight of that realization settled over me. What a waste. Vanessa's downfall. Over the next few days, I heard bits and pieces of her downfall. I didn't seek out the information. It came to me through mutual acquaintances, through whispers in high places. She was drowning. Her parents, embarrassed by the scandal, had distanced themselves. They had let her stay at their house, but it was clear she was nothing but a burden to them now. Her friends, the ones she had bragged to about her perfect life, had cut her off the moment the truth came out. She had spent years building an image, curating a lifestyle that was entirely dependent on wealth and status. And now, she had neither. I heard she had tried reaching out to old colleagues, hoping someone would take pity on her, but no one wanted to associate with a woman who had committed fraud and forgery. Her name was tainted. Her life was in ruins. I should have felt satisfaction, and in a way, I did. But more than anything, I just felt done. I had spent enough time on Vanessa. She wasn't worth another second of my life. And so, I let her go. Truly, completely, let her go. Moving on. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city, Sarah walked up beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, holding her glass of wine, taking in the view. Finally, she broke the silence. "So," she said softly, "it's really over." I let out a slow breath. "Yeah." She nodded, sipping her drink. "How does it feel?" I thought about that for a moment. How did it feel? It was strange, like standing in the middle of an empty battlefield after the war had ended. There was no more noise, no more chaos, just silence. "It feels," I exhaled, "good." Sarah smiled. "Good." We stood there for a while, the city lights flickering in the distance. After a moment, she spoke again. "You know," she mused, "you didn't just win. You got your life back." I turned to look at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than anger, other than resentment. I felt hope. I had spent so much time getting even, proving a point, reclaiming what was mine, that I hadn't stopped to consider what came next. But now, I could. Vanessa was gone. The past was behind me. And the future? For the first time in a long time, it was mine again. The morning felt different. Lighter. Freer. For weeks, my life had been tangled in Vanessa's web of betrayal, deception, and revenge. Every moment had been about unraveling what she had done, reclaiming what was mine, and making sure she understood the consequences of her actions. Now, all of that was over. I woke up in my penthouse, the space that had once been stripped bare, now fully restored. It wasn't just about the furniture, the art, or the material things. It was about the peace, the absence of Vanessa's presence, her lies, her selfishness. She was nothing but a ghost now. I stretched, inhaling deeply as I sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in a long time, I had no reason to rush. No battles to fight. No schemes to counter. It was just me. Me, and a future that was finally mine again. A clean slate. I walked into the kitchen, the smell of coffee already filling the air. Sarah sat at the counter, flipping through a magazine, looking relaxed, effortless. She glanced up when she saw me. "Good morning," she said with a small smile. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her for a moment. She wasn't Vanessa. She never would be. And that was the best thing about her. Sarah had stood by me when I needed her the most. Not out of obligation, not because she wanted something in return, but because she saw Vanessa for who she truly was. She had helped me through the worst of it, not because she had to, but because she wanted to see me win. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the quiet. "So," she said, tilting her head, "what's next?" I let out a breath, considering that. What was next? For so long, my life had been tied to Vanessa. Even before she betrayed me, she had controlled everything. What I wore, where we went, who we socialized with. Even when I thought I was making choices, they were choices filtered through her expectations. Now, I had complete control. I think it's time for something different, I murmured. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Different how? I shrugged. A new start. Something fresh. No baggage. No drama. I gave her a small smirk. No scheming ex-wives plotting to steal my fortune. She laughed, shaking her head. Sounds like a dream. I exhaled, taking another sip of my coffee. It does, doesn't it? And for the first time, I felt something foreign, excitement. The kind of excitement that comes when you don't know what's next, when the possibilities are endless. I wasn't trapped in the past anymore. I was moving forward. Vanessa's last attempt. I thought I was done with her. I really did. But Vanessa wasn't the type to disappear quietly. She tried reaching out one last time. A message, one I should have ignored. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. I know I messed up. I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I just need one chance to make things right. Please, just talk to me. I stared at the words, my jaw tightening. The old me, the man who once loved her, who once believed in second chances, might have considered it. But that man was gone. I didn't hate Vanessa anymore. I didn't feel anything for her at all. I deleted the message. And that was the final goodbye. Building a new life. The weeks passed. Vanessa faded into the background, just another lesson learned. My focus shifted to what actually mattered. My work, my friends, my future. I traveled, lived, did things that were for me, not because they fit into Vanessa's carefully crafted version of success. I met new people, not because I was searching for something, but because life was moving forward, and I was finally ready to embrace it. Sarah remained in my life, not as a replacement, but as a constant. Someone who had seen me at my lowest and never looked away. And one evening, as we sat on the balcony, looking out at the city, she turned to me and said, "You're different." I glanced at her, curious. Different how? She smiled. Lighter. And for the first time in a long time, I knew she was right. Because I was. I wasn't the man Vanessa had tried to destroy. I wasn't the man consumed by revenge. I was finally free. And that was all I ever needed.